Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. Today it's time to get busy on the Nova again. We built the door bars last time, and now it's time to turn them into X's. Just one more step towards making it a 650 quarter-mile ET legal cage. I'm also going to be messing with the floor X a little bit. I need to move the center of it back some, so I need to shorten it and make space for a gear vendor's overdrive. So let's get through the intro and check that out. Welcome to the Keefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Keefer. Alright, so I'm going to be turning this single door bar on each side into an X, as I stated earlier. And the only rules in the SFI book for this set of bars to turn this into an X are just that they need to run from high in front to low in back, and they need to be made out of 1.5" 065 chromoly tubing. The other thing that kind of limits the dimension in the rear is that the kidney bar that goes on the driver's side, kind of in this area here, can't be more than 3 tube diameters from the meeting point of the rocker bars and the main hoop. So that's going to limit how high or low I'm going to be able to place that X bar on the rear. And I also want to keep this bar below the bottom of the dash in front. One for ease of fitment and appearance, but also just for ease of ingress and egress for the driver and passenger of the car. I'm going to do both sides the same so that they're symmetrical, but I've measured everything out and done all the math, so we'll check that out, and then I'll start cutting some tubing, and we'll fit it up here in just a bit. Alright, so here's a look at the math that I did to figure out what the lengths and angles of these tubes need to be. How they need to be cut and notched. Basically what I've done is drawn up some more right triangles. I drew out the scenario that it's going to fit in here. So this is the front edge of the main hoop, the top edge of the rocker bar, and the back edge of the A-pillar bar, that lower piece of the A-pillar bar. Now what I've done is I've squared everything off using the angles that I know. So this lays back at 9 degrees, for instance. And I've calculated out all the little triangles and stuff to figure out at what angle this needs to reside, and also the angle that these bars will intersect at, that being the secondary diagonal and the primary diagonal. So I figured all of that out, and then I drew out the intersection points. After that, I figured out kind of both how much of the center line of this tube will be taken up by the main diagonal, and also how much extra length I'll have to give to that to cope to the main diagonal at the angle that it'll be crossing it with. So that just takes a lot of right triangles, drawing and calculating using sine, cosine, tangent, and all that. So I figured out that distance. And I've also figured out the angles and distances that the front and rear kind of ends of the secondary diagonals will need to be notched at. And the way I went about this in particular is I just figured everything out using the center line of the tube. You can use the top edge, bottom edge, or center line. And use the center line, so that means I have to add up and subtract back all the measurements for, since it's cut at an angle, how much I'm going to have to add or subtract, and at what angle that needs to be notched at. The front piece, so this is like looking in at the driver's side of the car. The front piece will basically be a little over 19 inches long. And then the rear piece will be almost 31 inches long. So I'm going to cut pieces with a little bit of extra material to actually make up that cope that goes around the tubes that they mount to. So I'm gonna add a little extra to that, cut the pieces, and we'll start notching. All right, let's cut some tubes. Got the tubes cut, let's go ahead and notch them now. Alright, so I know that all 4 notches on one side of all 4 of those tubes is going to be the same because they all intersect the main door diagonal at the same angle. So I'm going to set up for that angle first, notch all 4 of them, and then I'll set up to notch the other ends after that. I'm going to go ahead and notch the first one, and we'll look at it. I'm going to try it out on the car, make sure everything's looking right, and then power through the other 3. All right, cool. That looks like it's going to fit pretty well. Another thing I can do at this point is go ahead and just visualize this end, and it looks like this is pointing right to where it needs to go in the back here, and it's just a little check I wanted to do before investing that notch angle into all 4 pieces of tubing. All right, let's knock the other 3 out. All right, cool. Got all those notches all cleaned up. They're fitting to this piece of 1 5/8 really nicely. And that's 1 5/8 is what either side of these will actually be welded to. These are 1.5 inches, a little smaller, but nonetheless 1 5/8 diameter notch. Now the next step is just going to be measuring these out and marking them to the dimensions I figured out earlier. I'm going to start on the forward pieces, the shorter pieces. I've got the 2 front shorter pieces here, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and mark the length according to my calculations here. Now, what I've calculated out is actually the top trough to trough length that this tube needs to be notched at. And so that's going to be measured from this point. Now keep in mind this has been chamfered just a bit, so I'll want to add just a little bit on there to account for that. And then I'm going to go on to here and mark where I need to notch into the tubing. Alright, got the notcher all set up. Got the tube set up in the notcher. These are parallel, or actually not parallel but coplanar. That first notch and this one, and I've got it set up outside of the line there. Everything's set up, and just going to make the notch and then clean it up and see how it fits in the car. right, it's looking pretty good. Let's check it out in the car. All right, so it fits in place pretty nicely. I'm gonna need to touch up the end just a little bit on that side. It has just a little bit of gap in front. And I'm also gonna kind of want to measure angles and make sure everything's right in that respect. But that kind of gives you an idea how this needs to fit. And it's pretty nice so far. The notch is looking good. I just kind of want to measure everything, like I said, and just make sure it's landing in the right spot. So I'm going to do that momentarily. All right, so I've actually calculated out the kind of the dimensions of roughly where this thing needs to sit, and just kind of outer parameters, if you will. And I'm going to go ahead and mark those front and rear here. And so that way what I can do is actually stick that tube in and make sure it's kind of going where it needs to, and fitting in at the same time. Cool. Oh yeah, all right, that looks good. That mark is actually to the center line of the intersection point, and it's also to the center line of this, so it's not going to be exactly where it needs to go. I wasn't really thinking about that when I just marked it, but this line is lining up really nicely. The angle of this notch is off maybe a degree, so I'm just going to clean it up with the drum sander. But another thing I can do at this point is look down this tube and make sure it's aimed right where I want it on the main hoop, and it looks really good. So that's nice. I'm gonna just give it a little bit of a touch up and fit it back in here, and we'll see how it looks. All right, cool. So it's actually the bottom of the notch that was just a little bit proud when I fit it in the car. So I'm going to grind on that a little bit, and we'll see how that fits after I adjust it. All right, let's try this in the car again. All right, cool. So you can see how it lines up pretty nicely with that line there. It's got just a little bit of a gap on top still, so it's looking better, but still a little bit to go. But while we're down here, you can see kind of how that aims just above the meeting point of the rocker bar and the main hoop back there. And I'm actually going to be joining the secondary diagonal back lower piece a little above that rocker bar, just so that I can actually get in that joint to weld it to the plate that welds to the rocker there when everything's all together. So this is looking great. Just a little more adjusting to go, and it should be perfect. All right, cool. So I went ahead and cleaned this up a little more, and I actually ended up rotating the notch a little bit with the drum sander there, just a touch. And this thing's fitting in really nicely. The sides all tight together, and looks pretty good. Once again, still pointing at where I need it to be, more or less. It's kind of hard to tell just because of the roundness of the tube, but that looks just right. And we'll check it out from the door. So it shouldn't be too much of an obstacle to climb over for entering and exiting the car. I mean, it's just going to be in general, but it's just a safety thing that this style chassis requires. So it does clear the dash nicely. However, there's a gusset that needs to be at least 4 inches long, that needs to go from this bar to the A-pillar bar, so I'm gonna have to cut bracing out of the way and stuff for that when it's time to fit that. Just a little 1-inch tube, but otherwise that's looking nice and tight. And the whole idea with this is, you know, in this car I want it to be able to have kind of like a stock finish gauge cluster. It'll probably have like a LCD touchscreen in it, you know, like a Holly or something, but I just want to be able to put that in without tubes going all through it and messing it all up and stuff. Also, I wanted to make it relatively easy to get in and out of the car, since it's going to be kind of a drag and drive thing. One more thing I wanted to check out. It's looking pretty good for the factory style window cranks. So this car is power converted right now. I think we're wanting to go back with manual, and then this is the hole for that. But I've got at least probably 4 or 5 inches to this tube, and then on top of that there's a good 1 3/4, 2 inches to the door panel there. So looks like there's plenty of room for that window crank. Obviously you can get to the inside, you know, latch handle as well, which is nice. Just as kind of stock interior equipment goes. That's looking good. Should do the job, and now it's just time to fit the other 3, and we'll check that out next. All right, so I went ahead and off camera I made the driver's side front piece there, as you can see, and I'm starting to get that all fitted up. But before I get everything totally situated in here, I want to go ahead and notch the lower rear pieces. All right, so I'm just working on measuring this piece out here. This is going to be one of the lower rear secondary door diagonal tubes. And what I've done is just measure it out just like the other ones, where I make my basic measurement here, and then I make the precise measurement using the 1-inch mark. My goal is 30 11/16 of an inch, and I marked that right here. I'm actually looking at right about 4.5 degree notch. So I'm going to go ahead, set the notcher up for that, and I'm going to make this first notch, and we'll see how this fits in the car. All right, so I'm back here in the driver's side rear wheel tub area, and one thing that's really important for this particular tube I'm about to notch is I need to account for the difference in plane that the 2 notches are going to be in. So if I kind of look down where the tube's going to go, so from this tube here in the foreground to the main door diagonal over here, you can also kind of see where that little piece that's already in there is residing currently. I need to measure the difference in angle here so that I can actually make that into the secondary door diagonal. And the way I'm going to want to do that is to measure the angle using this you know, magnetic base dial angle finder. You know, so this is about 5 degrees, and if we look down this thing, it's kind of hard to see in this lighting here, but I'm getting closer to like 2 or 3 degrees. So I'll get kind of a more accurate measurement here in a bit, but I just want to try to see if we can visualize that on the camera here. So looking down at, can you kind of see that wedge there, that kind of shape? That's the angle differential that I need to measure. So on this tube here, the notch needs to be like this, whereas up there it needs to be more this way. What I'm going to do is just, I'm going to measure that difference, so it's between 2 and 3 degrees, and mark the tube with some arrows just so I know how to clock it in the tube notcher, and that'll just ensure that that I get the right kind of indexing in those notches. All right, so I've got the tube set up in the notcher here, and I've got the angle set to 4.5 degrees. I even have the hole saw lined up with my cut line here. But one thing you might notice, they're kind of obscured here, but you can see I've got these arrows marked all around the tubing. And I just do that to remind myself which way the notches need to be oriented as compared with the notch on the other side of the tube. What I'm going to do next is just use this little length of tubing. I'm going to put it here and then just set the angle to the angle I need. I usually base it off of, I'll use that as level. So I'll just put this whichever way I need to establish level, read what it says, and then use that over there on that little piece of tube. So I'm going to do that and set up for this notch, and go ahead and make it, clean it up, and we'll try the fitment after that. So here's where it seems to fit happiest. I need to kind of change my angle to make sure I've got the clearance I want down here. I'm looking for about 1 inch. It feels like it might be there, it might be a little tight, but this is looking pretty good. I think I might need to clean up the notch just a little bit, but actually, as far as I can tell, it's just about there. So that's looking good. I think just a little bit more fit up, and this thing will work pretty nicely. All right, so I took this back to the notcher. I shortened it just a little bit, and I also changed the angle on the back just a touch, and I'm going to see how it fits now. Okay, cool. So it's really close to the same, but something that I noticed looking down this before is that this was a bit long and didn't really line up with this tube. So, and also I'll be bringing this one down just a tiny bit probably, but I just want to get everything where it needs to go, and want some good clearance under there. So that's just kind of what I'm working on, going back and forth right now. All right, so it's looking like I need to clean this part of the notch here up just a little bit, and so that the that main door bar fits at a little bit different angle. So I'm going to do that just a little bit and check that out. Make sure it's still, oh yeah, it looks great. Cool. Alright. It feels like it's seated nicely on the tube. Alright, let's check this out in the car. Feels pretty nice. Perfect. Alright, yeah, that seems to sit in there nicely and seems to line up really well. I'm going to use this to establish that point. I'm going to tape it in here and check it out and see what we got. Alright, so it's lined up reasonably well, and this notch looks good, and that one's tight. So I think just a little bit of fine tuning and this thing should be perfect. Looks like it's lining up with that front piece pretty nicely, but it needs just a little bit of final fit up as well. So I think I'm going to go ahead and cut the passenger side rear lower piece, and we'll fit that up and compare all these angles and measurements and see how it looks from there. Alright, back over at the notcher, and while I've still got it set up at this angle, I'm going to go ahead and trim the driver side rear lower tube, secondary door diagonal here. And I'm going to trim it just a touch shorter. It just needed to be a little shorter to prop up just a little bit between those bars, the main hoop and the main door diagonal. So I'm going to trim this a little bit, and then I'm going to measure and set up to actually cut that passenger side one. This thing's looking pretty good now. I like how it's fitting in the back. My little spacer block here, I'm using to prop it up. It fits right in there with the tube seated in. So that's looking good. Now let's go ahead and notch that tube. Alright, cool. Let's see how this thing fits. Alrighty. Sweet, not bad. Yeah, perfect. Wow, that's actually really nice. Well, it feels like I'm just going to have to shorten this up just a little tiny bit. But I'm going to look at it from a few different angles, and I'll tape it in just like the driver's side there and check that out. But yeah, it's fitting really well, so that's awesome. Yeah, just some fine tuning and we'll be golden. Sweet. Alright, so after looking at this a little more closely, I determined that the top of both of these notches actually needed to be coped in a little more. I thought I was recording, but it was on like photo or something, so I didn't record me using the drum sander in here, but I just touched these notches up a little bit, just angled them in, both of them. So now I'm gonna go see how it fits on the car. All right. I could probably clearance it a little bit more on the top, and then looking down the tube here, it lines up with the front one pretty nicely. So I think I'm just going to clearance the top of this notch just a little bit, and then try to fit everything nice and evenly, and it should be great. Alright, let's see how this fits. Yeah, it looks like a nice fitting notch on the back there. Lines up with the front pretty nicely. Yeah, looks like they're fitting nice and symmetrically. This all looks really good. Looks nice and lined up. So really all that's left is just final cleanup. Get everything nice and polished. And I'll poke gas holes and everything for welding. But this looks like a nice sealed deal here. Now that the door X pieces are all cut, notched, trimmed to length, and fit in there, it's time to go ahead and clean them up to get ready to tack in the car. I think I'll go ahead and keep the front pieces loose just for now while I have to get in and out of the car fabricating stuff. But I want to get everything cleaned up, and we'll go ahead and tack those lower rear pieces in. All right, so I've been working on cleaning this lower piece on the passenger side here all up, inside and out, and it's looking nice. So what I'm also going to have to do is drill holes for welding gas expansion. And I want to go ahead and drill either side just so everything's well ventilated. And I'll also go ahead and clean up the landing spots now after I drill the holes, and get everything cleaned up for that. So that's what I'll be working on next, and I'm gonna go ahead and I want to leave these in place, the front pieces, because I like how they're positioned, and it's gonna help me line up the rear pieces I put them in. So I'm gonna do both rear pieces, and we'll check that out here next. All right, cool. So everything's all sanded, nice and shiny, and I've wiped everything off with acetone and gotten it real clean. And one more thing I need to do before I go ahead and tack these lower X pieces in is I want to go ahead, while I have excess, I want to go ahead and finish these welds down here between the main hoop and the rocker bars on either side. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll get the rear lower pieces of these door X's tacked in. Alright, cool. Now that I've got those gaps all welded up, I'm going to set those secondary door diagonal pieces up in there. I'm going to tape them in place and then get ready to tack them in. Alright, got everything all taped up in the car. I'm going to be tacking those two rear ones in on both sides, and we'll check that out right now. All right, well, it's awesome to have these all tacked in. Wish I could tack the front pieces in, but I just want to keep them loose just in case I need to kind of get around them later. This stuff's looking pretty nice. Lots of X's in the car. Got 3 up here and then 3 more back here. And a couple more to add. Got one in the roof, and then the wishbone has one. Did a nice video on the wishbone. Y'all should check that out if you haven't seen it. But this is really starting to get all braced up. Looking cool. All right, so now that the door X's are looking good, I want to go ahead and actually change the center X up a little bit. So I really like the design of this thing, and it would be really nice and strong the way it's close to these gussets and everything. But since I've set this up, the owner of the car wanted to go from just having a Powerglide to having a Powerglide with a gear vendor's unit. And the end of that thing actually ends up just a little past the center of this X. Now this car is going to be using part of a factory floor pan, and actually I have this over here. I'm going to be modifying the drive shaft tunnel a bit so that the high travel rear suspension works out a little better. But all in all, he wants a fully welded up steel floor pan, at least if possible. So what that means is I'm going to have to make it where the transmission drops out of the bottom of the car. So typically in a chassis car, you're going to be able to pull that floor up and get to all that stuff, and you can take everything apart and drop parts down or pull parts out, either way you want. But with that factory style floor, that transmission is going to have to go down through the bottom. And so instead of making it where he has to remove that gear vendor's unit separately, pull the transmission out, and then pull the gear vendor out, or however he wants to do it, I just need to shorten this X up and make it where all of that will fit right down out of the bottom. And that is possible, and we'll check that out over at the bench. All right, so we're back over here at the bench, and I'm getting ready to make a new X. So what I discovered is I was looking at moving that X, shortening it, and moving the center of that X back. And what occurred to me is as I do that, if a gear vendor's overdrive is not put in the car, or say it's ever ran without one, that X moved back towards the differential is going to crowd that drive shaft as it swings down as the suspension extends or droops, or however you want to put it. So what I'm going to do is I've actually figured out how much I need to droop that X, and it turned out to be about 15/16 of an inch, which will require me to bend this tube 6 degrees right in the middle. So I've marked this to length. I'm going to go over to the cold saw and cut it, and we'll bring it back here over to the bench and mark it for that bend. Alright, now that I've got this cut to length, I'm going to go ahead and mark it right in the middle. Cool. And what I figured out is just how much material that making the bend is going to take up. So I've cut this with a little bit extra material left on the tube. And what I'm going to do is, since it's such a minute bend, only a 6 degree bend, it's not going to take that much material up. So I'm just going to put it in the bender, bend it, and then I'll measure it to get exactly where the center of that bend is after the bend. One reason I'm doing it like this is because I haven't yet calibrated this die for this size tubing to know exactly where that bend starts geometrically. But that's all right. Once again, just a 6-degree little bend, and I left a little extra on either end. So let's go over to the bender and check that out next. All right, so the bend target's 6 degrees. I'm going to see what the spring back on this piece is like, and just kind of try to ease my way up there. All right, cool. So it needed to go to about 8 degrees, and it's looking pretty good. Let's take it over to the bench and check it out. All right, back over here at the bench and measuring this thing, and it needs to be bent just a tiny little bit more. So I'm gonna go back over to the bender and touch that up, and then we'll check this thing out. All right, touched it up, and measuring from tip to tip, I'm getting a droop just about 15/16 of an inch, so that's looking pretty good. That should clear the drive shaft pretty well. So now what I want to do is find the exact center of the bend, just kind of this trough here, and from there I'm going to find where I need to notch either end of this tube. All right, so I marked both ends where they need to be notched, and I went ahead and I marked them with tape, so they're marked all the way around, just to make it easier to set up in the notcher. So I'm going to go ahead and mark next to that tape, and I'll probably pull the tape off just so it doesn't make a mess. But let's go over to the notcher and I'll explain kind of what we're doing as far as the notches go. All right, so I'm over here at the notcher setting this tube up, and I've set up the angle, so it's going to be a 35-degree notch, and I've also set the depth of the cut, so I've lined the hole saw up with that line that I had marked with the tape earlier. But one more thing is I actually need to set a little bit of angle on this, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show you why I'm doing that. All right, so I'm going to walk around the tube here, and what you need to imagine at this point is if you can see that shaft that makes up the notcher arbor. If you can see how that's kind of level with this tube being level here, at least this part of the tube, right? So that's level. Now as you come around, that's not going to be level in the car because this is so it's upside down. First of all, let me just let you know that. But as I come around here, level across the car is actually going to be going kind of diagonally through here. So that's the way you need to look at this. And then if you look at that, see how it kind of goes off a level there? It angles. So what I need to do is look at that notcher shaft and actually angle this slightly off of straight down this way to be perpendicular with that notcher shaft. It's just a tiny little angle, and it just makes it so that droop in the tube doesn't kick fore or aft when it's finally put between the frame rails. And then just to make sure it fits in the car perfectly, I'm going to set this notch up parallel with that using the little piece of tube and the dial level thing. All right, so got this all tightened up. I got the drill on the shaft here, and ready to oil this thing up, and have that tiny little bit of angle in this thing just to compensate for that out of plane kind of position of this tube. Got it oiled up now, and I'm going to go ahead and make the notch, and I'll probably have to stop midway through and cut a piece out of the way, but we'll do that as I go. All right, I got one side all notched up. Now I'm gonna set it up in the notcher. Got my mark already made. Just need to set these up parallel, go ahead and notch them, and then we'll check out how it fits in the car. Alright, so you can see me setting this up. I used a little piece of tube and that magnetic base dial level to get these parallel. Once again, it's angled off just a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and get ready to make this notch, and then we'll check it out. I'll clean it up and we'll check it out after that. This one notched just in one pass. Off camera, I actually cut the tube just to length right at the edge of where this notch starts. That really helps, makes it a little handier. So that's really sweet. I'm gonna clean this up, and we'll fit it up in the car and see how it looks. All right, looking good. All notched up. Let's fit it up in the car. All right, let's put this in place and see how it fits here. Oh, wow. Wow, that's nice. Cool. So that'll give a couple inches in the middle of clearance for the tail of that overdrive unit. And really, that's all that was needed. It just needed a little bit of room, but also that relief in this thing will give that room for the drive shaft that's also needed if the overdrive unit isn't installed. And this is looking really nice. I think I'm going to tape it in place and make some measurements and just see if it needs any fine tuning, but otherwise it's looking great. Cool. All right, so now that the middle tube's in, it's just time to fit the two to complete the X that joined with it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that first notch at the appropriate angle. We'll go over to the notcher and check that out, and then I'll measure these out to notch the inside. And I'll have to change to a 1.25 inch hole saw for that too, so it'll be a little bit of a process, and I definitely want to get these done first. So let's check that out here in a sec. All right, back over here at the notcher, that same angle, 35 degrees. And what I've done is I've trimmed just a little bit off the end of the old secondary kind of X pieces here. And why I've done that is this notch was at 30 degrees, the new one's at 35, so it's a little more shallow of an angle. And I just want to start the notch right on the edge and not have to deal with that extra amount getting jammed up against the back of the hole saw there. So it's just kind of the help with that, and also to make sure I kind of notch past the old tack welds and stuff like that. So just kind of to make it easier. And now I'm going to oil up and go ahead and make this first notch in this one, and do the same with that second one. Alright, cool. So I've notched both of these ends at 35 degrees to match that centerpiece. And now what I need to do is work on measuring these out and setting the notcher up to notch the inside to meet up with the middle of the X. Alright, cool. So I've got the tube all set up in the notcher, and as usual I've got a couple things going on here. So that line I measured to earlier, I've got the edge of the hole saw lined up against that, and as you can see, I've drawn these arrows, you might be able to see on the tube, and the way I arrived at these arrows is I walked over to the car and I looked at how just as I had to kind of clock those notches on that main part of the X, This also needs to be kind of skewed just a little bit, because as this travels not only diagonal across the car but also downward, it actually clocks around that frame rail, and it needs to meet that main part of the X right where it's level in the middle. And so I need to clock the notch in the other end here just a little bit so that it meets nice and level. And so that's what I've done here. So I've kind of clocked it a couple degrees with this one going this way, and then that leaves this one kind of going the opposite. So it's all set up. I've tightened this thing down. I'm about to oil it up. Go ahead and notch this, and then we'll see how it fits. All right, I went ahead and trimmed the extra bit off, and now I'm gonna go ahead and oil it up, notch it. Oh, I caught myself. I almost forgot to change to the 1¼ hole saw. Let me do that real quick. All right. I'm really glad I caught that, because it really sucks to notch a tube with a hole saw that is too big, because you cut away too much material. If you go back and make the smaller notch, you have to make it shorter. So got lucky catching that one. But all set back up. Got my angles checked, and yep, looking good. Just gonna go ahead and make the notch, and we'll try it out after that. Gonna have to change the drum sander size too. Alright, got the 1 inch in instead of the 1½. Clean this up. Looks good, let's try it in the car. Alright, let's try this in here. Yeah. Oh, sweet. Dang, that's pretty good. Yeah, it fits pretty nicely. So, just looking at it right now, I might need to trim it just a touch, but I think I'm going to cut the other piece, fit it in there, and I'll see how they fit together. But that's looking really good. Cool. All right, got this one all set up about the same way, and same thing. Just gonna punch this thing out, and all tight. Got it turned at an angle. I went over there and drew arrows just to make sure I get the angle right, and just triple check. It's looking good. Got a couple degrees in it, and run the hole saw. Alright, let's see how this lines up. Oh, pretty dang good. Alright. Nice. Cool. Well, that's looking really sweet. Yeah, that's pretty much there. I think just a little cleanup to get it coped in just perfectly is in order, and then this should be just right. Cool. Next step will be poking a couple gas expansion holes here and here. Already have them back there from the old X, and just cleaning everything inside and out, and just that final little cleanup here and there. But this is looking really great. Cool. All right, so I pulled the X out, and I'm just back in the car getting everything ready to put it back in. I've been working on cleaning it all up inside and out and polishing the ends and everything. But what I'm going to do right now is drill the gas expansion holes up at the front of the X here in the main frame rails, just for those gases inside the tube as I weld them onto the frame here. Alright, got the gas holes all drilled and deburred and looking good. Now just some of that final cleanup, and we'll see when it's time to tack those tubes in. Alright, cool. Everything's all cleaned up and ready for the X pieces to go in. I even drilled gas expansion holes and used these pieces of tape to mark the front of where the tubes need to lie. So I've got the main part of the X that goes all the way across, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in place, and I'm going to use some masking tape to hold it where it needs to go. All right, that looks perfect. On to the next pieces. All right, cool. So I've got this driver's side rear piece going in next, and gonna need a little piece of tape to hold it in as well. As you can see, I've used a piece of tape to mark where this one needs to edge up against also. Just helps keep everything right where it needs to be. And it makes for a little bit faster setup when everything's all measured out. Just going to use one more little piece to keep it tight. Actually, I'll stick it on the bottom so I can visualize the next tube. Alright, and finally we got this front passenger side piece. Going to drop it in, line it up with the tape mark up front. It's looking great. All right, I'll go ahead and stick that piece of tape under there to all three tubes, and looks like it's lining up just right and is ready to tack in. Cool. So everything's all positioned and taped in, and now it's just time to tack it all up. So I've got the welder all turned on and set up. I'm going to be running 124 amps. Just seems to work really well for welding this thinner stuff to the thicker stuff. But just gonna tack the main piece in, and then the two other pieces to the frame and to the center piece, and then that'll be all set up and looking good. So let's go ahead and tack it up. Alright, that's looking good. Just wanted to peel the tape off to make sure it's all nice and seated well. Next, I want to just make sure these are lined up really nicely, and then I will go ahead, yeah, they look good. Go ahead and zap those together, and then give everything a final check out, and then add some more tacks for strength. All right, looking good, sweet. So now that everything's tacked in, I'm just kind of looking and making sure these tubes are lined up and end up right where they're supposed to. Everything's looking really good. So now the next step is I want to go through and add more tacks just to hold everything together with a little more strength, just to make sure that nothing pops apart before it's time to do all the final welding on this. So I'm just going to bounce around and add tacks, you know, just a little bit distance from these, kind of give them like an opposite counterpart, and then it should be good to go until it's time to pull this chassis out of the body and do all the final welding. It's looking really nice. Looking good. Got some additional tacks on here with some filler metal, so they should be nice and strong and keep everything in place up until when it's time to go ahead and do all the final welding. I'll probably add tacks to the bottom, probably right before I weld it, or maybe if I'm under there welding some stuff before then, I'll go ahead and do that. But it's looking good. It's all lined up and should clear the drive shaft and everything, and it's nice to have that in there. All right, looking super clean now. Sweet. Well, that's all looking really cool. Thanks for watching. I always appreciate you guys checking out my videos, and I really appreciate it when you like the videos and comment, and especially when you subscribe. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to be up to 600 subscribers, and can't wait to see the channel grow even more. Hope y'all tune in pretty soon. We got to check out some stuff on the Cutlass. Parts have been coming in the mail, and I think it's about time to start kind of installing some, and maybe we'll make some hoses in the next video and mount some sensors and stuff. So you'll want to check that out. Until then, take care, and we'll see you next time.